So I decided to talk about guitar amplifiers, and when I was thinking about how I'm going to present this, I thought perhaps the best way to do it is probably make a little mini-series similar to what I did when I was talking about different types of guitars. The reason for that is that there's just so much to cover on the topic of amplifiers, and I didn't want my video being sort of 10 years long. I want it to be small and accessible little chunks. So just to introduce what I'm going to talk about, and I'll put the links to the other ones. I'll try and release this as a structured series. The amplifier, when we're talking about guitar amplifier, the most basic function of the amplifier is to make your guitar louder. So as an example, again talking back about the guitar series I did about the different guitars, I mentioned the acoustic guitar, which just produces noise on its own. You don't need an amplifier for that. And then I also talked about a couple of different electric guitars. I mentioned the black guitar you can see just behind me. I called that a basic electric guitar because it's the way it's designed is quite a basic level. It's what most people will recognise as an introductory kind of electric guitar. And I also talked about this guitar, which is a more advanced electric guitar with some higher end features on it. It was quite a bit more expensive when I bought it, and for that reason it's more of a sophisticated guitar, if you will, something that's probably more suited to advanced players. Now, the reason I'm mentioning that is to introduce the aspect of amplifiers. This guitar, no matter how much I've spent on it, or no matter what equipment it's got on it, what different knobs and switches and functions and features and equipment that's on the guitar, unless I've got an amplifier to go with it, it's nothing more than an acoustic guitar. In fact, it's even less than that, because the way that an electric guitar is built without the cavity and the sound hole, if you remember, that the acoustic guitar's got, you'll barely be able to hear this thing unless it's plugged into something. So that's all I'm going to get out of this instrument without an amplifier, no matter how much I've spent on fancy electronics and hardware and other stuff like that. So really, it's a little bit pointless without having an amplifier to go with it. So just as a quick example, I mentioned that the idea of an amplifier is just to make the sound louder so that you can hear it. That's the most basic reason for it. I've got this one plugged in at the minute, but the volume was down. I'll just turn the volume up. So that's the difference there, is simply the result of this being plugged into an amplifier. The sound I've got set on the amp is literally, it's a basic, clean sound. All I was trying to do was make the natural sound of the guitar louder so it can be heard. So that's the key basic feature of an amplifier. You'll see, if you've looked at different amplifiers, and there's so many of them, that a lot of them nowadays, they didn't used to when I was first starting, I've got loads of different features like special effects built into them. A lot of them now have things like Bluetooth and that, so that you can connect your phone and play backing tracks and all that type of things, even on some of the more basic amps. So there's just so many different choices to go for, which is one of the reasons I've decided to sort of break this down into segments. So I'm not going to be recommending sort of go and buy any particular brand of amplifier, or this one's better than another one. The idea is I'm going to start from the bottom with the very, very most basic amp you can buy. This little guy sat next to me here, that's probably what I'm going to start with, because that's the most basic thing I've got here. All that does is make the signal louder. It doesn't do anything else for me. So I'm going to start from there, and then I'm going to have a look at some other different amplifiers that have got a little bit more in terms of features on them that may or may not be useful to you, and may or may not be things that you want to consider in terms of buying an amp. I'm going to focus mostly on what we call practice amplifiers. Those are small amplifiers, similar to this one or the other one behind me, that are small in size. The power output is quite low compared to some other amplifiers, and they're designed to be used, as the name suggests, a practice amplifier, for practicing your playing in your bedroom or in your music room at home, wherever you're doing it. They're not designed to be sort of blasting out on stage and playing, you know, big concerts and gigs and things like that. That's not the idea of it. If you're playing live and with a band and you're looking for an amplifier for that type of thing, the chances are you probably already know a little bit about guitars and amplifiers, and you've probably got a better idea about the sort of sound you want to produce, and you've probably got a decent sort of shortlist in your head about the type of amplifiers you'll want to be looking at. So that being the case, this series probably isn't going to be that much use to you. It's going to be aimed at people who perhaps haven't bought an amplifier before, are just starting out with guitar, like quite a lot of my students are at the point now where they might have started on acoustic, decided they want to have an electric guitar as well, and obviously to go with the electric guitar they need to buy an amplifier to go with it. So I'm going to start off with the most basic amplifier, and then have a look at some of the more sophisticated ones that are available on the market. Anything interesting or that I refer to, as ever, I'll link, and I'll also, as I promised, I'll link together this series so that you can have a look at the different areas that suits you. I'm going to start off by talking about a really basic amplifier. This amplifier that I'm showing now, this is the most simple basic amplifier that I've currently got. It's actually a bass guitar amplifier, but that doesn't matter for the purpose of what I'm trying to show you now and what I'm trying to explain. It's a guitar amplifier of this sort of standard, this sort of price, would be exactly the same, more or less. So in terms of keeping it simple, this is the simplest thing that I've got just to be able to show you. So on the front panel here, this is where we've got all the stuff that I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to work from the outside in. Over here on the far right, as you're looking at it, you've got the power switch, fairly self-explanatory, to switch the thing on and off. Next door to that, we've also got a really useful feature, which is a headphone socket, which enables you to practice silently. Even though these practice amps tend to be quite low powered, depending on your circumstances, if you've got sort of family at home or if you've got neighbours that are sensitive, sometimes if you're playing late at night, it can be useful to just plug your headphones in and be able to practice without disturbing anybody. If I was to plug my headphones into here, it would silence, it would cut off the amplifier, so it wouldn't make any sound, and there'd only be me able to hear it through the headphones. So no matter what sort of amp you're looking at, if you need to practice late at night, or if you're around people who might be annoyed by people practicing, then a headphone output is always a great thing to have. Make sure you can practice longer without bothering people. This side of the amplifier, you can see I've got my guitar lead plugged into the input here, so that's fairly simple as well. Whatever guitar you're using, electric guitar, as I say, this is a bass amp, it doesn't matter. I would just quickly say at this point, do not try and use a guitar amplifier to play a bass guitar through. That can cause damage to the amplifier. Doing it this way around won't cause a problem, but doing it the other way around, if I was to play a bass through a guitar amp, that could cause a problem. But in this instance, it's not going to be any issue. Next to my input, I've got, if you can see it, it says master volume. That's the main volume control for the amplifier. In fact, it's the only volume control on this amplifier. And all that does is determine how loud the amplifier is going to play back. Now, I mentioned before, the power ratings for these little practice amps. This one's rated at 15 watts, and if you can see where the knob of my volume is pointed, it's down at around 1 out of 10. And just to play now, that's absolutely perfectly loud enough for me to be able to practice whatever I want to do. And that's literally, that, as I say, that's 1 out of 10. So you can imagine, even a little amp of this size, a cheap little amp, if I was to turn this up and crank it right up, it'll be probably a lot louder than you'd want to be playing at home with your family and neighbours and things like that before getting complaints. This section of the amplifier is called equalisation. What this does is it changes the relative volume of different frequencies in your sound. That might come across a little bit complicated, but we can adjust how loud we want the high-pitched parts of our sound to be, the mid-range of our sound, and the lower pitch parts of my sound relative to each other. So this is this works separately from the volume. So if I play my chord, if I was to turn, this is the high equalizer all the way up, it becomes very high and nasally. So that's going to make the high frequencies in my playing louder. The mid one, I'll turn that up just as an example. That'll make the middle of the chord, the beef of the chord, stand out a little bit more. I was just playing an A minor there, by the way, if you wondered what I was just playing. It was a simple chord. And the low, I'll turn that up. That makes the lower notes, the bassier strings, so the thicker strings on the guitar, sound even lower. This amp, because it's a bass amp, it's got 4 knobs on there. This one at the end is called low. This one actually doesn't do anything when I'm playing a guitar through it because it's designed for bass guitars. Normal guitars do not get down to these low frequencies where this knob becomes involved. So a normal typical guitar amplifier will probably only have 3 little knobs there. One will be high, one will be medium, and one will be low. So for this example, forget about this one. Just think about you've got your input to plug into, your volume for how loud the amp's going to project, equalizer, low, mid, high, headphone socket for silent practice, and then obviously the switch to turn it on and off. It's about as basic as amplifiers get. It's about as cheap as amplifiers get from what I've seen. But if it's just a case of making your guitar louder so that you can hear the electric guitar, it's absolutely fine for that purpose. It's not going to do anything else for you. It's not going to give you any fancy effects. It won't even give you the overdrive distortion effects that I've used on some of my videos, the crunchy sort of sounds. This basic amplifier isn't going to do that. You might need something more sophisticated for that, but this is your entry level. This is the most simple amplifier that does what it says on the tin, makes the guitar louder. That's all it does, and it does it quite well. So the amp that I've just showed you is literally the most basic, cheapest entry-level type of amp you could buy to put your guitar through. Do I recommend purchasing an amp like that? No, to be honest, absolutely not. The reason for that is, despite it being the cheapest, the value for money aspect of it, you spend a little bit more money, you can get something that is just so much better and so much more flexible than your very, very, very cheapest one. As I said, all that's going to do is make your guitar louder. It's not going to give you any variety of different sounds or tones to the guitar. It doesn't have any effects on it. Now, effects are a totally different subject, but it's useful to be able to have access to those on your practice amp because it enables you to play things that sound closer to some of the things you might want to be practicing to. Now, as I mentioned, that amp, I actually don't know how much that one costs, the little one I just showed you. Maybe 50 quid or something like that, new even, I don't know. The amplifier that I've been using to produce everything I've recorded on electric guitar on my channel so far has been through that other little practice amp that I've got sat on the floor behind me there. Now, that amp is probably an example of the next level up. I'm going to cover in a separate video, but by means of example, the one that I'm using, I've had it about 15 years now, so it's not available anymore, it's discontinued. I just had a quick look on the internet, on Google search for to buy one if I was wanting to buy one. Used one of those, it set you back about 70 or 80 quid. And as you'll see in my next video, because I'm going to demonstrate that one in my next video, it's just going to give you so much more flexibility, so much more options, and a much higher level of quality. The sound quality that I'm demonstrating for you might not fully come across because I'm just recording through the camera speaker here. I'm not using any fancy recording equipment or anything like that. Literally, it's just whatever the camera's picking up. So it sounds a lot better in the room than what it will do perhaps to yourselves on the camera. But by going that little bit extra, as I say, that's a example of a used one for 70 quid, 80 quid. To buy an equivalent one like that now, or in fact, to buy something like that now, you'll be getting something with more features, as I mentioned, with the Bluetooth and extra connections and things like that to make your practicing easier. probably the tuner built in. This one doesn't have a tuner built in. You'd be looking at maybe 100 quid, 100 to 130 quid or something like that to be able to get a really, really nice practice amp that's got all the sounds and all the effects and everything you'd ever want on it. So in terms of value for money, I know you're looking at maybe probably, well, double the price kind of thing, but for that extra bit of money, I would definitely recommend at least even trying them out, having a go on them, or if you're not comfortable doing that, have a look at some YouTube reviews, look at as many reviews as you can. I always say don't just look at my channel, and just try and gauge for yourself how much more you're going to get for your money. Something like that, or the modern day equivalent, will literally see you through years and years of practicing. No matter how much your level goes up, it'll still be there for you, it'll still do everything you want it to do. As I say, I've had that for over 15 years, and that's still my go-to practice amp now, and even the amp that I use for making these videos. Now, on top of the amplifier that I've just demonstrated, which gives you it amplifies the guitar, it makes it sound cleaner. The more sophisticated version of the practice amp is going to give you different choices of tones and different sounds that you can produce. So you can play a lot of different styles of music, and you can make your sound a lot more authentic to what you're playing. I'll just give you a couple of really quick examples of what that amplifier will do that the other one didn't, and then I'll cover it more in a separate video in this series. So there's a little clean sound. I was literally just amplifying the sound of the guitar, switch to a different sound, and you can see immediately the difference. So one of the things that the more sophisticated amp will do is allow us to dial in what we call overdrive, distortion, so we can create the sort of dirty sound, anything from a little bit of a breaking up kind of a blues sound to a full-on heavy metal sound, which suits me because that's my style of playing. The other amp, I've no chance of making that sound with it whatsoever, no matter how hard I try. With this amp, the next step up, I can just turn a knob, press a couple of buttons, and I've got that sound on tap, and I can do it immediately. So even at these low practicing levels, which are important for practicing in your bedroom, in your basement, wherever it is in your house that you're going to practice with, I can reproduce those super heavy sounds that you associate with loud bands without needing to crank the amplifier up so you're breaking windows and setting car alarms off. So I've switched my sound to a heavy sound. You can just see just by switching it. I've got that sound on tap, so a clean sound to that, and anything in between I can just easily produce just by using that amplifier. I've got nothing else connected to that. That's just that little practice amplifier, that 15-year-old amplifier I've got. It's also got effects built in as well, so that I can produce a wider variety of sounds. I wasn't using any effects there on the clean sound or on the distorted sound, but one of the things that I commonly use effects for, if I'm playing what we call lead guitar or solo bits, where I might be playing a little riff like that. That sounds okay, it's not too bad. If I was to add some effects to that, then I can change the character of that and make it sound a lot more pleasant the way that you'd normally hear it sound on records. So just add some effects on, a little bit of, I think I've got some chorus, delay and reverb. Don't worry about that, I'll mention effects in another video. But I'll play a similar type of thing, just with a little bit of effects on the amp, and hopefully be able to hear the difference it makes and how it sounds a lot better than what it did without them. You might just hear a little bit of the echo sort of reverb type thing there. Again, I'll cover the effects later. But the message is, don't always buy the cheapest one just because it's the cheapest one. Just have a think about, you know, going forward, you buy the cheapest one, are you going to have to spend money again in buying a slightly better quality one at a later date? Or is it worth making a decision now, getting something that's going to last you a lot longer? In my case, as I say, I've had this 15 years plus, and you'll get a lot more life out of it and a lot more enjoyment from playing. So the recommendation is, don't buy the basic one that is just literally an amplifier. Consider having a look at something that will give you a lot more flexibility and a lot more features. Whichever type of amplifier you're playing, enjoy.